Football at 4, we do it every day. John McMullen on the Boardwalk Honda hotline at JF McMullen on Twitter. We are less than 2 weeks away from the NFL draft. We've been doing a look at the draft all week long. John McMullen's mock draft 1.0 is at 973ESPN.com. By the time we got through that mock draft, John, you're probably on 2.0 by now, right?
Yeah, always. And now you finally get some correct information as we get closer and closer. You start seeing the dominoes fall. But there's always subterfuge and best exemplified probably last year by Baker Mayfield. I mean, what the Cleveland Browns did there and tried to put everybody looking in different directions, which, is always kind of amusing with a team that has the number 1 overall pick, because that's the only team that doesn't need to be disingenuous about anything. But it's sort of like second nature around this league. It's high ops. It's like CIA type stuff, the NFL version of it.
Well, you can check out John's version 1.0 right now at 973ESPN.com. There is some other football stuff I want to get into, but I want to start with this tweet 2 hours ago from Adam Schefter that the CFL league office notified all CFL teams that the AAF will not allow its players to sign with teams. How is that possible? The AAF doesn't exist.
Well, there's a lot of legal proceedings and things that have to be worked out. Obviously, that's what happens when you have a company that essentially defaults on its responsibilities from a financial standpoint. You've heard the stories. We talked about them a lot. Everything from UCF, Central Florida, getting stiffed for 7 figures, not getting paid for rent to use the stadium. You mentioned about some of the issues between Florida and Georgia and practicing and workers' comp. It's just a giant mess. And what happens in those instances, when you head to bankruptcy, you get to bankruptcy court, and then things are looked at as assets. And I guess the player contracts are in that equation, and there's no specific outs for other leagues. I don't know if Adam corrected that. Obviously, the NFL can sign players. But that was in the AAF contracts that the players could leave for NFL opportunities, whereas obviously the CFL, XFL, arena football, those were not allowed. So that's probably the gum in the works, so to speak, and that'll eventually be worked out, because courts are not going to stand in the way of people trying to make a living. That's been proven over and over again. So essentially, these players will get to sign where they want to sign, but it could be held up for a week or two.
Okay, just making sure, I'm reading this and thinking to myself, are the AAF people really going to hold these guys from trying to go sign on with another league? Because there was that thought that there was a window that they would, I guess, essentially suspend the league and could bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, that was the hope when they first shut it down, because that's the term they used, was suspend operations instead of just ending operations. I guess there was a hope that they would at least play the championship game and have a title game and try to go about it. But Tom Dundon just essentially pulled the plug and said, what's the point? So the league is done. There's no question about that. Now you just have to work out the wrangling and who's responsible for all these unpaid bills. And generally people are going to get paid cents on the dollar, and that's always what happens. So it's going to be frustrating for a lot of people.
Yeah, by the way, John McMullen, 973ESPN.com. You can check out his mock draft 1.0. We are 14 days away from the NFL draft, and we will continue our draft conversation next week, as we did a lot of draft last week. But Kyler Murray visiting with the Giants, and then he posted some Giants stuff. I know we like to read the social media stuff, but could you see a scenario where the Giants could get a package together to move up to number 1 and take Kyler Murray?
Well, to do that, Arizona would have to not want him. And there's been some talk of the Cardinals, and some people have used Cleveland. I just mentioned Baker Mayfield. Some people have used them as an example. The assumption around the league is that the Cardinals and Cliff Kingsbury want Kyler Murray. If that's the case, there's nothing you can do. They're the only team that can control their own destiny, and they'll take him. If there is some subterfuge and some hijinks from their standpoint, and they don't have as much interest as we all think, then yeah, I mean it's a possibility for the Giants, for the Raiders, anybody who wants to get up and get Kyler Murray. You're going to have an opportunity to do that if they decide maybe an edge rusher is what they really want, and they already have Josh Rosen.
Right. I mean,
But
that's the thing. Is like, could they get a package big enough to succeed and just say, you know what, Rosen is good enough if you're going to give us that?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, if you like a quarterback, because we talk about the value of positions all the time, the value of that position is so much higher than every other position. No, I mean, if that's what they want, if that's what Kingsbury desires, if that's what they promised him, that's what they're going to do. And there's not going to be a package large enough to take them off. And they're not going to say, well, Josh Rosen's good enough. If, you know, they traded up to take him last year. He's a high-level prospect himself. If they felt he was the guy and they didn't need Kyler Murray, they'd be going in that direction. So
It's
I think
so odd, though, because the same GM's there, right? Keim's still there, right?
Yeah.
But the coach is different. So Keim was there, thought Rosen was the guy. What changes his mind? I mean, obviously the coach is the guy who changed his mind. But now you're essentially letting the coach make the decision.
Yeah, and I've talked to you about that before. I think it's a disastrous decision for Steve Keim. There's no doubt about that. I've criticized him mightily. You can't trade up, which is what he did, to take Josh Rosen at number 10 overall, I believe, last year, and hire a coach in Steve Wilks, and then blow out the coach and say, you know what, I'm going to take a quarterback again at number 1 overall. That looks disastrous from a GM standpoint, but He's already going down that road. And, you know, I guess from his standpoint, it's desperation, and you're trying to find that next Sean McVay. And if you want that next Sean McVay, if you think you have that next Sean McVay, you have to promise what he wants. And if he wants Kyler Murray, you have to give him Kyler Murray. But, yeah, if you're asking me personally, I would have never hired Cliff Kingsbury. I would have let Steve Wilks stay. I would have tried to build around Josh Rosen. I don't think there's any reason to have deterred from that plan, other than obviously he had a bad season because he had a bad offensive line. He had a bad football team. You build from there. That's what you do. But obviously there's desperation from Steve Keim.
Yeah, I think that story, the whole Rosen, Murray, Cardinals, I mean, even here on the East Coast, it's somewhat intriguing because, as you mentioned, Washington could get involved. The Giants could get involved. I mean, 2 NFC East teams definitely have eyes on, you know, quarterback. Washington, you know, John, what is their plan at this stage going into draft day with the quarterback position? They got nothing right now. I know they got Keenum over here, but they can't be thinking that's the long-term fix.
No, they don't think it's the long-term fix, but they do feel comfortable in the short term. Remember, Alex Smith is who knows if he's ever going to come back at his age, but he's still in the picture, but they know he won't be available this year. And if you need a bridge quarterback, you know, Case Keenum's not a terrible way to go. And they also have Colt McCoy, so there's a competition as well. It's not going to get anybody excited, but no, they understand they need to get the long-term answer at quarterback. They're in a position where they might be able to do it at 15. They might not. because generally there's 4 quarterbacks with first-round grades, and if they start getting pushed up the board, the conventional wisdom is all 4 are going to be gone by 17, which is the Giants' second pick. There's a few people who believe Daniel Jones won't go in the first round. It'll be an early second-round pick. But I would say most of the people that I've just talked to, that I've texted with, believe he's going to go much earlier than a lot of people suspect. So they're right on the cusp of being out of the quarterback sweepstakes in this draft as far as the first round goes. So it's going to be very interesting, and that's why they could be the leader in the clubhouse for the teams looking to trade for Josh Rosen.
Yeah, I know. And then, of course, the Giants with Eli Manning, and they're, essentially going to go in another season. Is there any scenario, even on draft day, that could happen, like if they got Kyler Murray or if they got Josh Rosen, that Eli Manning doesn't take the first snap for them this year?
I think it's very unlikely that he wouldn't take the first snap. I certainly think he'll be the starter week 1. But while I say that, the clock is ticking. If they take a quarterback at 6 or 17, the clock is immediately ticking, and I don't think he will take the first snap by week 5 because I think they'd be a bad football team with Eli Manning as a starter. That will become evident rather early, and we've seen the pressure. We talk about it all the time. If you take a quarterback in the first round of the draft, and you're not very good, there becomes incredible pressure to get him on the field, and the Giants will be under that pressure. So I think whatever quarterback they get, if they select a quarterback in the first round, I think you could start that clock. And certainly, I would say worst-case scenario, that first-round pick is going to be the starter by midseason.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. It's Football at 4. We talk NFL every day here at 4 o'clock on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Dak Prescott obviously going to be the quarterback in Dallas. Are they working on keeping him there long term, or is this a year that makes that decision for them?
Well, they're in a tough situation because I don't think Dak Prescott is a superstar. I think they know he's not a superstar. But he's good. He's a good quarterback. He's above mediocre and below great, and that's a tough position to be in because you could do a lot worse, but you always want to do better, and it's not easy to do better.
Right, and once you give him that contract, you're locked into him being your guy if he's just good and not great.
Exactly, and the numbers at that position. For even good quarterbacks, Kirk Cousins being the obvious example, that's a lot of money to pay a good but not great quarterback. So it is a difficult decision. Ultimately, I think you do play it out as long as possible. And if the Cowboys, say, have another really good season, if they win the NFC East, if they win a playoff game, then you're sort of in a position where you almost have to move forward with Dak Prescott. But if the floor falls out and they're much worse than maybe anybody expected and he has a bad year, then, yeah, I could see them revisiting the situation because I think they kind of know he's not going to be a superstar quarterback.
Yeah, and they've been very quiet this offseason, which I guess you could say is a good thing for them. They've added a couple of little pieces here and there that have not made the big headlines, but you got to, if you're, an Eagle fan out there and you're seeing what's going on with the Giants and their quarterback situation, they traded OBJ and the Redskins have constantly been a mess and they got Case Keenum, so you're kind of snickering at them. Dallas has kind of gone on its merry way here, and you would have to think that they are, a contender with what they've done in the East. They might be the favorite right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the NFC East, I think it is sort of a two-horse race between the Cowboys and Eagles, but the Cowboys belong in that conversation. I don't think there's any question about that. They're very talented on the defensive side of the ball. Those young linebackers, Leighton Vander Esch and Jalen Smith, they were spectacular last season. They worked something out with DeMarcus Lawrence. They wanted to add a better safety. They didn't get that done. I know there was a lot of speculation that Earl Thomas would come home to Dallas, and that didn't materialize. So that might be a bit of a disappointment. But that defense is certainly going to be projected to be top 10 again.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is, can they add enough in the passing game to supplement what Ezekiel Elliott gives them? And that'll sort of tell the tale of where they'll be. Maybe they'll be a 10-win team if they can't get the passing game going, right on the cusp of winning a division, being a wild card, versus maybe a 12 or 13-win team that's a significant contender. But that's where we talk about Dak Prescott. I'm not sure he's consistent enough a passer to ever have that dominant offense that they potentially could have if they did have a superstar quarterback.
Yeah, they go into this draft. Now, they traded their first pick away for Amari Cooper. Now, looking back on that, at the time we kind of laughed, but now looking back, Cooper ended up being a nice pickup for them, right?
Yeah, he played very well, and he certainly improved their offense a great deal. Was a great fit, and we'll see. I mean, one of the issues, remember, Amari Cooper had one really, really great year in Oakland, and the issue from their standpoint was consistency. And the same guy didn't show up week to week, year to year. A lot of drops that we've talked about. And that's what you have to be concerned about. He obviously, when you sort of move to a new team, there's a desire to get better, and I think people realize that. And maybe you get a little bit comfortable, and that same desire, whether it's subconscious or not, is not there. So you do have to keep an eye on him because he hasn't been a consistent player, but what he is extremely talented. So if he plays up to his ability, there's a very good chance that he'll continue to be a dominant player, but you do have to keep an eye on him.
Yeah, no first-round pick for Dallas. They did get Jason Witten back, but tight end would be a spot for them. You would think to get a successor, part two, for Jason Witten. That offensive line, which was one of the best in the league a couple of years ago, it kind of struggled a little bit, maybe offensive line for the Cowboys. Giants, we know, they have 2 first-round picks thanks to that trade they made. 6 and 17 is the other one. So we go back to the question we asked earlier about Rosen. Is 6 and 17 and whatever else they would need enough to get them up to that top spot? But the Giants, these next 2 weeks, you're going to hear, I guarantee you probably would know this too, that you're going to hear so much buzzing about that team.
Yeah, and because Dave Gettleman's done a lot of things that short-term look questionable. And I used Oakland as the example for that, and the fact that, look, the Raiders and John Gruden took a lot of hits last year, trading Khalil Mack, trading Amari Cooper, because they both played so well. Mack was obviously in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. Cooper, we just talked about how much he made a difference for the Cowboys, and the Raiders were terrible. But now you fast forward and you see what the Raiders are going to get. Now they have an opportunity with 3 first-round picks to get some significant talent. And they've already gotten Antonio Brown, who we've talked about some of the off-the-field stuff, and that's legitimate to be worried about. But if you're just going to compare him as a receiver to Amari Cooper, he's better. Are they able to get Kyler Murray and get a quarterback and an edge rusher and a running back or a tight end? All of a sudden, it doesn't look as bad. Same thing with the Giants. People say they lost Odell Beckham Jr. Well, 2 things with that. They weren't very good with him, number one. So they needed to get better. And if they are able to finally get the quarterback and add an edge rusher on top of it, then all of a sudden it's not looking bad. And I always say it's strange to me because I've gotten a lot of Giants fans on social media criticizing, because I did not blame them for the Odell Beckham trade. And if you think back to that organization, of all organizations, Mike, when Eli Manning was a young quarterback, they got rid of their two best skill position players, Tiki Barber and Jeremy Shockey, all for the reason because they didn't want those toxic personalities around a young quarterback. And it worked. They won 2 Super Bowls. And it's amazing how short and the mindset is for a fan base. I mean, this is a team that succeeded with addition by subtraction. It could work again.
They're a very interesting team to watch between now and the draft, because there's going to be a lot of buzz with those 2 picks. And then, as we talked about earlier, which team do you think has more is more apt to make some sort of big move on draft day, Washington or New York?
I would think the Giants. I don't think if the Redskins, and I'm talking specifically draft, if you're talking adding Josh Rosen, I think it's very likely that the Redskins could do that. But if you're talking about just moving up or moving around draft choices, I would say the Giants. I think if the Redskins make a splash, it'll be for Josh Rosen. And I think there's been really 3 teams that you sort of hear whispers about, and that's the Redskins, 4 teams, excuse me, the Redskins, the Giants, the Patriots, and the Chargers. Patriots and Chargers would be heir apparents, obviously, for 2 really good quarterbacks. Giants and Redskins would be to get them on the field sooner rather than later. And we had that discussion early with a young quarterback. If the Giants traded for Josh Rosen, I would say it's more likely than not he would take the first snap in week 1. But while I say that, I don't think the Giants are going to trade for Josh Rosen.
The NFL never sleeps. We've got the draft 14 days away. It's live on 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget our draft party. You got the Sports Bash keyword of the day. It was sent to your phone if you have the app. If you don't have the app, make sure you download it from the Apple Store or Google Play on your phone. And Monday, 3 o'clock, you will get another Sports Bash draft party keyword sent to you. And we'll see you at this year's draft party with a chance for a 2019 Eagles experience, and that is live at the Wonder Bar in Atlantic City. John McMullen, football at 4 on 97.3 ESPN. Thank you, pal.
All right, have a good weekend, Mike.